The smell of smoke still clung to my hair when she walked into the courtroom. Victoria Sterling Whitmore strutting in on her red-bottom heels like she owned the place. She had no idea that the same man whose cabin she torched to ashes was the federal judge now sitting above her. And in just a few minutes, her perfect little empire was going to collapse in front of everyone. But let me take you back to where this all started. Act 1. The conflict begins. When I first moved into Pine Ridge Estates, it looked like one of those glossy magazine neighborhoods. Big lawns, shiny SUVs, Christmas lights that matched. Everyone smiled for show. And then there was Victoria. She showed up on my porch the very first day, wearing pearls and cashmere, holding a plate of cookies. I remember thinking, this woman belongs on the cover of a real estate brochure. And she leaned in with that rehearsed smile and said, "Welcome to our perfect community." Perfect. All right. If perfect meant you bowed down to her every ridiculous HOA rule. At first it was small things. A citation claiming my grass was half an inch too long. A letter accusing my mailbox of being non-compliant, even though it was the same as everyone else's. Then she went after the cabin I was building my quiet writing retreat. Suddenly it was a fire hazard, visual pollution, even disturbing wildlife because of the solar panels I'd installed. I laughed the first time I read one of her letters, but the laughter faded fast when I realized she wasn't joking. Victoria carried the HOA bylaws everywhere, like a preacher with a Bible, and she enforced them like they were commandments. She'd walk the neighborhood at dawn, phone glued to her ear, whispering to county inspectors about finding violations. She thought I was some quiet artist, a recluse, someone she could crush with paperwork and fines. And honestly, at first I let her think that it was easier to play along, to collect my evidence in silence, because I knew one day she'd go too far. Act 2. Escalation and the turning point. That day came in winter. I woke to the smell of smoke, but not from a chimney. My cabin, my sanctuary, was nothing but a blackened skeleton against the snow. The fire crew rolled up late, almost an hour after the first 911 call, 47 minutes too late. And I knew immediately this wasn't some accident. I combed through the wreckage myself. The burn patterns were too precise. I found a half-melted purple glove, boot prints in the snow, size 7, high heels. And the kicker, my security camera survived. Tough little thing, still blinking green. Every sign pointed to Victoria. But the worst part wasn't the evidence, it was her, standing at her kitchen window with a coffee mug, smirking as she watched me sift through ashes. She even raised her cup like a toast, like she was proud of what she'd done. And that was the first time I wanted to give up. I stood there in the snow, staring at the ruins, thinking, maybe she's right. Maybe I should just pack up, file the insurance claim, and get out. She controlled the HOA. The fire chief was her brother. The inspector was on her payroll. How could I fight a whole machine? For a moment, I actually believed her power was bigger than mine. But then my phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor, the 77-year-old widow down the street. "I saw something last night. Can we talk privately?" Eleanor had lived under Victoria's thumb for years. She'd resisted every attempt to push her out, and she'd been keeping her own records. That night, she handed me something I'll never forget. Audio pulled from Victoria's smart home system, hacked by Eleanor's grandson, and on that recording, Victoria's voice was crystal clear, plotting my cabin's destruction with her brother Rick, Inspector Daniel Chase, and the rest of her cronies, talking about accelerants, delaying fire response, making it look like faulty wiring. My blood ran cold hearing it, but underneath the anger came clarity. She hadn't just harassed me. She'd built an entire criminal ring under the mask of a suburban HOA, and now she'd handed me everything I needed to bring her down. I called the FBI. Within 48 hours, agents had wired my property, pulled bank records, analyzed burn sites across the county. And when I learned that my cabin sat inside a federal forest buffer zone, that was it. Her little HOA problem had just turned into a federal case. Victoria still thought I was the quiet artist. What she didn't realize was that I'd spent 18 years on the bench, dismantling criminal enterprises bigger than hers. And this time, she'd picked the wrong target. Act 3. The showdown. 3 weeks later, Victoria called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda was vague, but I knew she was planning something desperate. The community center was packed. She strutted up front in her Armani suit, slides clicking on the projector. The title read, "Protecting Our Investment." She started talking about dangerous residents, about how my electrical fire threatened property values. Then she pulled out fake legal documents, complete with county seals and signatures claiming the HOA had eminent domain powers to seize my land. People shifted nervously in their chairs. Her performance was convincing. If you didn't know the law, but I did, and so did the agents waiting outside. Because right as she clicked to the next slide, FBI raids were going down across the county. Her house, her office, Rick's fire station, Daniel's inspection files, all seized in real time. Then came the crack in her armor. Rick bolted out of the meeting mid-presentation, trying to make a run for it with a bag of cash and a fake passport. Agents took him down in the parking lot, right in front of everyone. The room erupted in whispers, phones buzzing with news alerts. Victoria tried to keep her mask on, but the tremor in her hands gave her away. Still, she pushed through the slides, talking about community safety. But it was too late. The crowd wasn't buying it anymore. By the time she called for the vote, half the residents had already left to check on the raids. The rest voted to table everything, effectively killing her last power grab. She gathered her forged papers, walked calmly to her car, and drove away like nothing had happened. But I saw it the flicker in her eyes. She knew it was over. And it was, because the real climax came weeks later. In a federal courtroom in Minneapolis, Victoria arrived with her attorney, convinced this was a civil insurance hearing. She walked in confident, until she looked up and saw me in the black robe, sitting at the bench. The color drained from her face. Her perfect lipstick smeared as her mouth fell open. And for the first time, Victoria Sterling. Whitmore looked small. Her lawyer tried to stammer through introductions, but I cut him off. "Mr. Kellner, there's been a misunderstanding. This is not a civil case. Mrs. Whitmore is here as the defendant in a federal criminal prosecution arson, racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, and more." The binders of evidence stacked 2 feet high. The recordings, the bank transfers, the video of her leaving her house with a backpack, returning without it, minutes before the fire. Even her own Facebook post warning neighbors about high fire risk at the exact time she was pouring gasoline on my cabin. Her knees buckled. She whispered, through tears, "I didn't know you were a judge. I thought you were just some artist." And that was the irony. She didn't destroy me because of who I was. She destroyed herself because of who she thought I wasn't. When the FBI cuffed her outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, the woman who once terrorized an entire neighborhood with HOA bylaws was reduced to a sobbing defendant facing decades behind bars.